My name is Kylie Heap, and I serve as the Executive Director of Support After Abortion. I want to welcome you to our webinar where we will focus together on how generational trauma can impact abortion. Let me begin with a moment of gratitude for the work that you're doing. Thank you. Thank you for your dedication, your selflessness, and your empathy. Last month, we enjoyed a roundtable discussion on the connection between after-abortion healing and effective parenting. It was hosted by Greg Mayo, who is our men's healing strategist, and Amanda Hoff, our relationship development specialist. We featured a panel of providers who shared invaluable insights, observations, and successes in addressing the challenges of supporting clients who are parenting after abortion. You can access this webinar and all of our webinar recordings on our website in the Provider Training Center. Let me introduce our speaker today. Kara West holds a master's in social work and is a licensed independent clinical social worker. She works with the Abortion Survivors Network as the Family Connections Coordinator. Kara loves helping both biological and adoptive families raise and support their abortion survivors and feels honored to meet with the young survivors as they learn and process their stories. For 9 years before joining ASN, Kara had been a therapist specializing in working with children and families. She also enjoys gardening, raising chickens, baking, and being an adoptive mother of 2. Thank you so much for being with us, Kara.
Thank you so much for inviting me to join you today as we talk about generational trauma, especially today, looking at how it influences those who experience abortion. Like you mentioned, my name is Kara West. I'm the Family Connections Coordinator with the Abortion Survivors Network. I would just like to take a really brief moment to introduce you to ASN if you aren't already familiar with us. As the only organization worldwide serving abortion survivors and their families, so far we have connected with over 800 survivors worldwide. Their ages range from those who are preborn, so still in utero, to those who are in their mid-90s. Our founder and director, Melissa Oden, began ASN to give survivors and their families a place for community, to find healing, and a voice if they like to share their stories. As a Family Connections Coordinator, I get to serve moms and dads who are now parenting their surviving child, adoptive parents who are raising abortion survivors, and yes, young survivors as they're learning and processing their stories. I'd like to start just by reading a quote from author Resmaa Menakem. Author Resmaa Menakem wrote that trauma decontextualized in a person can look like personality. Trauma decontextualized in a family can look like family traits. And trauma decontextualized in a people can look like culture. He wrote this from his book, My Grandmother's Hands, and if you haven't already read it, I highly recommend it. In it, he shows the impact of racial trauma as it can impact a culture. So let's look a little bit about what exactly is generational trauma. Let's define it really quickly. The American Psychological Association has defined generational trauma as a transmission of trauma or its legacy in the form of a psychological consequence of an injury or attack, poverty, and so forth, from the generation experiencing the trauma to subsequent generations. The research that initially came out really just focused on generations of Holocaust survivors, but now we're seeing more studies showing the impact by those who have been impacted by slavery, families of war veterans, the systemic oppression of Black people, the historical trauma experienced by American Indian communities, and so many more that I just can't fit on one slide. I do want to take a minute, though, to talk about that word trauma. We probably hear that all the time, right? It's a really hot topic word. And the trauma we're talking about today is big trauma, an emotional reaction to a highly stressful, frightening, some would say life-threatening or distressful event that's very difficult to cope with. If you aren't familiar with adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, I love to just touch on them really quickly. They include a child experiencing violence or abuse or neglect, witnessing violence, a family member dying by suicide, a family member or parent abusing substances or alcohol within the home, parent incarceration, severe mental health problems, parental instability, homelessness, extreme poverty, and repeated discrimination. What the ACEs study found was that a child who experienced more adverse childhood experiences early on then led to poor outcomes as an adult, which makes sense, right? Toxic stress is really what we're looking at when we're talking about how trauma is passed down to next generations. Someone who experienced one event of a traumatic experience is definitely traumatic, But what we're looking at is someone who has experienced something over and over, something that has been repeated. So, for example, perhaps this looks like a child who lived in a home, unfortunately, with domestic abuse, or lived in a home full of sexual abuse or physical abuse, something repeated. The extended or prolonged stress can actually change immune systems, brain development, and stress response systems. And these are the effects that can be passed down onto the next generation. So how can trauma sometimes get passed down? Through DNA at times. And I have to be honest with you, I thought that if someone who experienced trauma, it can actually change their DNA sequence. But that's not the case, and it's a common misconception. What it actually is, it's an epigenetic change in how the genes are read by the cells. A genetic adaptation can be passed down through a chemical marker for a gene, which could make a person from the next generation be more susceptible to a specific behavioral pattern, trauma reaction, etc. As I mentioned before, I'm a social worker. There's a reason why I did not pursue a science degree. So if you are out there and you have more knowledge and expertise on this topic, and you can give a really good explanation of how trauma is passed down in genes, please put your knowledge in the chat. I love that we get to learn from each other. Another really interesting fact is that all of the eggs that a woman carries form in her uterus while she's still a fetus in her mother's womb. A part of you, your mother, and your grandmother all shared the same biological and emotional environment for a period of time. It's just wild. I'd love to share with you a true story about a girl named Ying Liu. She was born in China during the one-child policy era, which was enacted at the time to curb their supposed overpopulation issue. 1 year after she was born, her mother learned that she was pregnant with a boy, and 5 months into her pregnancy, she had an abortion. Ying knew about her unborn brother all of her life. It wasn't something that her family talked about, though, and so she didn't really get a chance to experience her grief over the loss of her sibling until she went to graduate school. She was in counseling and psychotherapy training, and she said in her story, "This was when I became aware that something was hidden all along, and it was seeking expression. It was something that had just kind of gotten swept under the rug, passed on, and a little bit forgotten." When Ying asked her parents about how the abortion impacted them, she was surprised when they replied, "The abortion didn't matter because most people also did it under the national policy." She realized that she needed to go to therapy to deal with some of the grief and loss that she was struggling with. While she was in group therapy, Ying began to experience significant somatic terror. And while she didn't necessarily describe specific symptoms that she was experiencing, such as migraines or stomach aches, body pain, things like that, she was able to relate her symptoms to the fact that her parents survived during China's Cultural Revolution. She asked them many questions surrounding their experiences and discovered that their family suffered significant loss. On top of the loss of her brother to abortion, her family suffered the loss from execution and suicide of several family members. Ying was able to trace back this loss to 3 generations, making her the 4th generation to experience loss from violence. And she learned that her body stored all of that felt trauma. Another book I'd like to offer to you if you haven't read it yet is The Body Keeps the Score by author Bessel van der Kolk. I will warn you, it is a heavy and difficult read, especially if trauma is something that you've experienced in your life. But I will say it is extremely powerful and helpful to understand how the body does store that trauma. So we know that everybody is different, right? Someone may experience a traumatic experience the same as someone else, but they might come away with different trauma reactions from that. And they can vary from generation to generation. It depends on an individual's temperament, their personality, and that genetic predisposition. On the right, I have a list of different trauma reactions, and I won't go into all of them. I won't read them all because I know you all read very well, but I do want to highlight some of these that you probably see more commonly in the groups that you run, especially as they're connected with those who struggle with anxiety, depression, and PTSD. How can this kind of look? If we're talking about behavioral patterns and things being passed down to the next generation, what does that look like? We know that many cycles of behaviors are rooted in trauma, and I'm sure you've heard this saying, trauma begets trauma. It's true. What this could look like played out is a fear or distrust of others, whether that's a police officer, doctors, mental health providers, men. And it can lead to someone not asking for help or support when it's needed. I'm sure you hear that too, working with women that you serve and men in the groups that you facilitate. Can look like avoidance and those staying in unhealthy relationships. It could also be a parent who experienced neglect as a child may develop an eating disorder and pass down disordered eating habits and beliefs surrounding food. Or it could be unhealthy coping skills being passed down. Parents who struggle with alcohol or substance abuse, using sex as an unhealthy coping skill, denial, self harm, interpersonal violence, so many different things. We know that the coping skills that are modeled are more likely to be repeated, especially by kids. Or it can be the complete opposite. The next generation may decide to parent or raise their children differently than how they were raised, and sometimes that pendulum can be swung too far in the opposite direction. And I have to admit, sometimes I find myself doing the same. I want to go through specifically how generational trauma can impact someone who experiences abortion. And I just want to say at the beginning that I know that there are so many reasons why a woman who is in a crisis or unplanned pregnancy may seek an abortion. But the ones we're going to go through today are specifically how generational trauma may influence her decision. So women who experience a crisis or unplanned pregnancy may be more likely to make an abortion decision if, like we had mentioned on the previous slide, there's that cultural level of distrust of others, not sure that she wants to ask for help or feel like she can. Like Ying's family, trauma is silenced in families. I know this happens all the time. We just don't talk about secrets and we repress feelings, right? We sometimes kind of shove things down deep inside and hope that they just go away. Another reason may be that not only is she living in poverty currently, but there are generations back who have also experienced poverty. There was a study done in 2005 here in the US, some of the top reasons why women sought abortions. It wasn't specifically about generational trauma, but I did find it interesting that in that study they found 60% of the participants were living below the federal poverty line. That's a large number of participants. She may also make an abortion decision if racism, discrimination, or marginalization have been prevalent in her family history. That same study found that 31% of participants were Black and 19% were Hispanic. Another, I know, very common reason why a woman may seek an abortion is if previous generations have also experienced abortion. And that in itself is also a unique aspect of generational trauma. Abortions that have been common, passed down through generations, and common in the family. Another is a lack of family support systems, a history of broken families, whether that was abuse or families just breaking apart, or, I know this is common too, absent fathers. The same study found that 40% of women reported not wanting to be a single mother or experiencing relationship problems. Another reason why a woman impacted by generational trauma may seek an abortion is that interpersonal violence has been woven into her family history. Our own national rape-related pregnancy rate is 5%. Just this year, the CDC confirmed that a study that was done in 1996 found that of that 5% of rape-related pregnancies, 50% of those women went on to have an abortion. And then the last two reasons how generational trauma can impact abortion is there's a family history of substance and alcohol abuse and a family history of untreated mental illness. You may be surprised or not surprised to hear that yes, there are abortion survivors who have also experienced abortion. As I mentioned, every person is different and everyone's going to respond to trauma in different ways. Some survivors' families experience the cycle of abortion. Some stories involve abuse, neglect, manipulation, depression and untreated mental health illness, and so much more. Trauma and generational trauma can affect each person in different ways. And like we've talked about, this could include genetics, their culture, personality and temperament, their current situation, and their support system. I would love to introduce you to a friend of mine. Abortion survivor Priscilla is here with us today, and she has an incredibly powerful story of how generational trauma was played out in her life. So Priscilla, I would love for you to join and just take it away.
Thank you, Kira. This is a heavy topic, and I am here to just share my experiences with this topic. Everyone has a story, and some of you may be thinking that your story relates to the generational trauma that we're talking about today. My story is basically how generational trauma of abortion is passed down. My mother was widowed with 4 children and was heartbroken, desperate, fearful, and she was pregnant with twins. So she decided to seek out an abortionist. And my twin life was taken that day, but mine wasn't. So I was born later that year. So abortion trauma entered my life even before I was born. In the ways that Kara explained, it's a unseen process, really. My mother never dealt with that reality. She buried her grief from her husband dying, who was the love of her life. My first abortion was at 19. I was in college, and the whole thing about that abortion was that it was arranged by my parents. I'm a different generation. There were not resources either, right? Back then in the late 60s. My parents took me down and they arranged an abortion. No conversation, no discussion about the deeper issues. And a few months after that abortion, my mother dropped the bomb and told me that she tried to have me aborted. And again, nothing said. It just kind of froze in time for me. And it explained why I never felt wanted or loved. So that was part of the consequence of that trauma, trauma on top of trauma. My second abortion was at 25. And this time I let the boyfriend make the decision. And I think some of that reaction to trauma is not only that, but being an abortion survivor. Many of us feel like we're invisible. We don't have a voice. We're muted in real life and we don't belong. So all of those other people making my decisions was kind of part of that. And I didn't really feel like I had a voice. So that affective trauma silenced me and causing me to feel very unimportant and invisible. After my second abortion, if that wasn't enough trauma in my life, I pivoted and took a job in an abortion clinic. So that's my preliminary story, but how did that cycle break? And this is what I want to share with you in the next couple minutes. Generational trauma can be broken. I had a near-death car accident, and I came out of that really more discontent about my life, searching for reality and truth. At that point, I became aware of my need for change. This took me to an opportunity in rural Alaska, here in Alaska, out in Dillingham, which is a rural community. And I worked to finish my graduate program with the Native healthcare program there. I had Christian friends for the first time, and that was a support against the trauma. And I also was in this beautiful place. I came from San Francisco to rural Alaska, which is just breathtaking in the summer. But my behavior didn't change at that point. And so, unmarried, I became pregnant again. So, would abortion strike again in my life? And so, at that point, I decided to have my child. I was 30 years old. I had a master's degree. So I knew I would be able to take care of him. At that point, it was like I discovered my voice. No one would tell me what to do with this pregnancy. 4 months after my son was born, I went on my knees and I surrendered my life to Jesus Christ. And the abortion was no longer going to haunt me because I had been filled with the Holy Spirit at that point. Now, my son, who is 43 now, has 2 sisters. One is 41, one is 38. I raised them. I was married to their dad, but I did divorce after his drinking and unfaithfulness. But that cycle of generational trauma had broken with me, and I've been on this road of healing. And in 2019, I connected with the Abortion Survivors Network, which I got healing through their program. I had gone through post-abortion healing during the 90s. So I had gone through that process of forgiveness and forgiving not only others, but myself in that process. And then I connected with, and then there were none, which is a ministry for people that worked in the abortion industry. I've been so blessed by these resources that have been made available to me. And I'm really encourage all of you to keep doing what you're doing. I have 3 beautiful children, 11 grandchildren, and 3 great-grandchildren. And I get emotional because God has blessed me so much beyond my imagination. I just want to thank Kara for allowing me to share my story and to hang on and listen to the rest of this wonderful presentation.
Thank you for being so willing to share your story so openly. I know that we all learn the best from listening to each other, and I appreciate you being here. We've talked about what generational trauma is, trauma reactions, and things like that. But then you had mentioned being able to break that cycle for yourself and then your family. So we're going to next focus on how do we break that cycle? How do we help our clients break that cycle and bring healing to themselves and their families? And the first thing that we need to do is to just have awareness if there is a trauma that has been left untreated. Becoming aware of a trauma that's been carried and passed down from generations before us. And then we need to identify the source, finding out where that trauma stemmed from. And that's hard to do. It's always hard to face something difficult like that, and it takes a lot of courage. And then to seek help addressing it. Like you had mentioned, Priscilla, reaching out to the different resources and going through the healing process ourselves. And it takes support. We're not meant to go through this on our own, which I know is one of the main reasons why you are all here today, is you are serving others in that capacity. You may already be using genograms in the groups that you run, but if you don't, this may be a helpful activity that you could use either in the group setting, or you could use it as a homework assignment per se for a client who's interested in doing it. The genogram might be a really helpful way for someone to identify if a trauma has been carried down, or if there's a behavioral pattern that's been passed down by generations that they want to break. A genogram can show major events, cultural factors, mental illness, medical conditions, traumas, addictions, relationship dynamics, and all sorts of different things in one nice, somewhat neat piece of paper. Or now they have programs that you can do online. I have a very basic example here on the left of what this looks like. They're pretty simple, straightforward. On genograms, circles represent females and squares represent males. There are lines that join them that show the relationship. In this case, these individuals with solid lines are all married individuals. On here, this circle, double circle, is Amy. This is her family genogram. Amy went back 3 generations on hers. The individuals at the top are her grandparents, her parents. She has a mom and a dad who are married, and a brother who was married. Amy married Bob, and they have a daughter. So that's a very basic outline of a genogram. And then below it, there are some really basic ways to show relationship statuses, emotional relationships, and all sorts of things. I do have a handout to give to you that will go into all of this in much more detail and will give you additional symbols and tools to use for your clients. Genograms can show all sorts of things. Going back to Amy's example, we can show whether she and Bob have a healthy relationship or if there's confliction or abuse. She can add in if there has been trauma or substance addictions, medical issues within her family, all sorts of things. Then when it's all said and done, when the genogram is finished, you can have this activity done within your group if it allows for that, or it can be something that someone can process through individually on their own. But then your clients can have a time to reflect on what they learned from their genogram. You can ask them, how does it make them feel and what stands out to them? And then looking at how did their family deal with the emotions or pain? If they're looking for patterns, what kinds of patterns did they notice being passed down to different generations? Does it help them make sense of who they are? And maybe most importantly, what makes them hopeful after looking at their genogram? So what can we do with this information? How can we help our clients process the information that they learn? We as providers of facilitating groups, we know the freeing power of getting something out into the open, the power of getting secrets dug back up and getting them out. So if there's an opportunity to open up a discussion with their parents about their lived experiences and how they cope with it, and then notice, and maybe if they're able to, if their parents have a healthy relationship with them, ask if their parents notice any patterns or habits narratives that their family continues to display. So not only something that was passed down, but at the present moment, is there anything in that genogram, or is there anything in that discussion that their family continues to display? And then to potentially talk through these areas with someone that they trust. But if I may add, maybe the most important piece of what to do with this information is to decide what they want to change and what they want to continue. This may be a difficult piece, a parent's role in how to prevent things that have been passed down to us, how to prevent them from being passed down to the next generation. And I realize that not all of your clients are parents. Not all of your clients have immediate families of their own. And that's okay. This is still something that I think that they could benefit from as they go through the healing process themselves of learning their stored trauma. But it also helps them relate in a more healthy way to others in their lives. It could be friends, coworkers, colleagues, you name it. The way to do this is to recreate a new narrative that they want their children to embody and to begin in their lives. And one area how to do this is communication. This is so important. How the details of an event are discussed, how the details of a traumatic event or how the details of patterns and things that happen to past generations are discussed to the present or future generations. The language being used, the voice tone being used in that conversation, and how attitudes and beliefs are portrayed. And I really appreciate this. I think, Priscilla, you gave such a great example of how you communicated what your mom experienced when she found herself being pregnant and not knowing what to do after losing her husband. The way that you shared her story and your story with your experiences with your children, I think is a fantastic example of the empathy that you use for her and for yourself in those situations. And then another area of how to do this is to focus on family functioning, so current family functioning. Like we mentioned, the coping skills that are modeled are more likely to be passed down. So what kind of coping skills are being modeled within their homes? Mental health care. Is therapy or counseling being addressed and used if it's appropriate? And more so, are emotions being spoken out in their family? Are their kids able to express their thoughts and their needs openly with parents? And relationships. This may be a very difficult one, especially if someone has experienced generational trauma of various types of abuse, interpersonal violence, those kinds of things. What do current relationships look like in that home? If they are married or if they have significant others living with them, what do those kind of look like? Is forgiveness and reconciliation being practiced? Is the family spending good quality time with each other? And those kinds of things. And then the home environment. We know the powerful aspect of nature versus nurture and having a warm and loving home environment. Here are some ideas of how to discuss and process through generational trauma in a group setting. Again, I don't know if some of your groups that you facilitate offer time to do this, but if you do have time, I think that would just be incredibly healing for some of your clients. And the first way to do this is just to make intentional space for discussion. So giving your clients the opportunity to share specifically about their family histories. And then to listen. We know that sometimes all we need to do is listen and to be an active and empathetic listener and not rush them through their process. We know those who've been impacted by trauma can only go at their own pace and only as deep as they're able to in that moment, and they may need to take lots of breaks. And then fourth, to allow connection but not correction. I know in the groups that we run, we know as providers, the power of hearing a shared experience. So someone who's been through something similar can be so healing. And at the same time, in that group setting, we don't want to fix each other. And that's something I really appreciated about a webinar I attended through Support After Abortion not too long ago about the importance of clients not trying to offer solutions to each other in the group format. So important. And then lastly, if you're able to support your clients in various ways, if you're able to have a group session on psychoeducation and trauma in the body, how trauma affects our bodies, giving examples of healthy coping skills, maybe cognitive reframing. If your clients are parents, having conversations about what healthy parenting skills can look like and setting appropriate boundaries with others in their lives. You may have some clients who could benefit from possible one-on-one therapy or counseling. And that's okay. I would say that's probably pretty normal for someone who's experienced generational trauma. And I'm not going to go into all of these in detail for sake of time, because I do have a handout for these for you as well. But I wanted to just throw out some different trauma-informed therapies that are available if your clients may be interested. Each of these different types of therapies have their own national websites. So if you live in Montana, you can look up providers who are certified in these specific therapies who lives in Montana and hopefully may be located closely to where your client may live. Her plan, which is the one I have listed at the very bottom, we use all the time at ASN. Her plan is a national resource directory site. All of the resources that they offer have been vetted by them to be pro-life and life affirming, if that's something that's important to your clients. This include looking for anyone for therapy, for food assistance, financial assistance, housing, transportation, support groups, you name it. One thing that I have been really humbled by and honored to watch as I've been able to work at ASN is the power of forgiveness that abortion survivors are able to work through and hold for their moms who tried to abort them. Watching them go through that process is just outstanding, and it's incredible. It's incredible to see how forgiveness not only changes them and how it heals them, but also how it heals relationships in their life. And it's not easy. It's not easy. And it starts with empathy, like you, Priscilla, being able to find compassion for previous generations and how they endured what they experienced. It's hard to do that, to put ourselves in somebody else's shoes. It's an active process where we consciously choose to let go and to move forward. Our founder and director, Melissa Oden, wrote a healing curriculum book that she offers survivors to go through if they're interested. And in there, she wrote a chapter on forgiveness. I would love to share with you a quote that she wrote from that. She wrote that knowing every person you meet is a person with inherent dignity and value, just like you, is an anchor. Recognizing that every person, including you, makes mistakes, with sometimes disastrous outcomes, is also a firm foundation for forgiveness. Realizing that forgiveness is something that will transform your life as much, if not even more so, than the person you forgive is also powerful. And we know that forgiveness can be so healing emotionally. Absolutely, right? But what's cool about that is it's also healing physically. So trauma can be passed down through generations. We've talked about that. And it can impact our nervous and immune systems. But so can forgiveness. And I don't think that's talked about enough. Trauma can affect our fight, flight, and freeze responses. It can result in changes in heart rate, changes in blood pressure, and it can put someone at an increased risk of depression, heart disease, and diabetes. And yet forgiveness can come right on in there, and it can calm stress levels and leads to improved health. And resilience can also be a hot topic word, but I think for very good reason, especially as we talk about generational trauma, because resilience is the capacity that a person holds to overcome and bounce back from adversity. And resilience can be passed down via epigenetics, just like generational trauma. Again, I'm a social worker, so I'm going to try and explain this the best that I can with the research that I found. Studies show that there's an epigenetic signature of resilience and that it may be partially present from the moment of conception. Some genomes are more changeable and can be modified through environment. We've talked about the importance of nature versus nurture. Internal resilience can be influenced by family, friends, and life experiences, and these involve the development of healthy behaviors. And this kind of brings us back to being able to focus on what narrative we want our children, what narrative our clients want their children and future generations to embody. We know that there's always hope. Even when it's hard, even when it seems like nothing will ever change, there's always hope. And we can make a change and help our clients to make a change and difference for themselves and for the future generations to come. That's what I have. Thank you again for letting me come and participate with all of you today. If you have any further questions or anything you want to connect with outside of our webinar today, please feel free to reach out to me, connect@abortionsurvivors.org. Or if you're interested in learning more about ASN, you can find us online at our website or Facebook and Instagram.
Kara, thank you so much. We do have some questions that we would like to bring to you. So one of the questions that came up, the slide that the resources that you shared, EMDR, some of those clinical supports. Can anybody be certified in that, or are those trained clinicians that lead those type of therapy?
That is a very good question. I'm so glad you asked that to clarify. Those are certifications for mental health professionals to be certified in.
Thank you so much for answering that. Is there a certain number of generations, basically generational traumas, required for someone to experience generational trauma?
That is also a really good question. There aren't any research studies that specifically state there's a specific number of generations that a person needs to be part of to experience generational trauma. It could be as simple as parents. Our parents passing down trauma to us doesn't necessarily need to be from grandparents and back. But what is really interesting, I found in the research that I did, was that generational trauma can be felt and stored in a person's body back to 7 generations. Wild.
Wow, that is wild. 7 generations. So people that you've never met, but it's still impacting us. That is, thank you for sharing that, Kara.
Absolutely.
One of the other questions, do we need to have a therapist review a genogram if we ask our participants to make a genogram?
I don't think so. In my opinion, I think anyone would be able to process through that with someone that they trust.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Another question that came up, we heard the correlation between faith and healing. Some of our providers lead secular groups. How would you lead a participant if they are not a Christian, or if they do not want to take a faith lane, but they desire to break these generational cycles? How would you lead that participant or that facilitator in that question?
Yes, that is so good. You're right. Not everyone was going to have a faith background, and that's okay. They can still break generational trauma in their life and break cycles from being passed down. I think the biggest piece, just being able to identify the trauma they've experienced, work through the healing process themselves for that trauma first and foremost, because they won't be able to help the next generation or their families unless they've had that healing for it themselves. And then to identify what specific pattern or behaviors do they want to discontinue in their family, and then to find appropriate support for that, whether it's a support group or finding a therapist who may specialize in that specific area.
It does. It's being able to meet them where they are. That's what I'm hearing.
Exactly. Thank you. Yes.
Being able to hear what they're asking and keeping our agenda at bay. We have another one for you. The client does not have a safe or healthy relationship with their family or with their parents. How would they gather information for a genogram or more insight into their family trauma history?
I think in those moments, they need to put themselves first and really emphasize the importance of healthy boundaries. If their parents aren't safe individuals for them to have these kinds of conversations with, because we know, especially when we talk about trauma, conversations can be easily triggering and be led down rabbit holes that we just don't need to go there. And if that's the case, I would wonder and ask them if there's someone else that they would feel safe having those conversations with who could have some information or insight. Maybe other family members, grandparents or siblings, cousins, or family friends.
Family friends, I didn't even think about that. Thank you for guiding that answer. It looks like we have one more. So this question is, does generational trauma happen only to minority races?
Absolutely not. I know that it sure can, especially as it relates to cultural trauma and cultural trauma being passed down. I know we touched briefly on what that could look like as a culture. Sometimes in the Black community, having a fear or distrust of police officers, doctors, individuals like that, and for good reason in most cases. But no, generational trauma could look like abuse happening within a home, could look like alcohol or substance abuse. It doesn't have to be related to race or ethnicity.
It can impact everybody, no matter where we are, no matter our money background, no matter our demographic. It doesn't pick and choose. Thank you for asking that question, participant. Also, Kira, thank you for direction with that. We are so grateful that you took time to help us understand the generational trauma and how it can impact our reproductive story, how it can lead to abortion and how it impacts the family as a whole. Kira, this has been a gift to have you join us today, just to bringing awareness on what our clients could be sitting in. We have this amazing saying here, root versus symptom. So what you allowed us to learn today was about the root that possibly our clients are sitting in with their symptoms. So thank you for educating us to dig a little bit deeper to bring awareness.